From the first breath he took beneath the open sky, the boy was not like other children of the steppe. His eyes, it was said, held the horizon within them, sharp, clear, and impossibly far away, found in the wreckage of a strange vessel by Ong Khan, the warlord of the Taliskars. The boy bore no name, no family, no explanation. Only the stars above and the steel in his stare marked his origin. Ong Khan, a killer of men and master of horse, should have killed the foundling. That was the way of things. Strangers were threats, outsiders curses. But something in the boy's silence made the old chieftain pause. He took the child, raised him as his own, gave him the name Jaghatai. The Taliskars were not gentle people. They were horse nomads of the empty quarter, a sea of grassland broken by high cliffs and rolling black mountains. They lived and died by the spear, the bow, and the knife. They raided other tribes for meat, salt, iron, and horses. In that brutal life, Jaghatai thrived. By the age of 4, he could ride without a saddle. By 6, he could bring down a steppe lion with a bone-handled knife. And when he was 9, he killed a man for the first time, an older boy who had taken a whip to a servant girl. Jaghatai broke the boy's arm, then his neck, and stared down the entire tribe when they questioned him. Ong Khan did not punish him. Instead, he called for fermented mare's milk and toasted the child's fury. But rage alone does not make a leader. As Jaghatai grew, so too did his hunger, not for blood, but for unity. He rode with warbands across the steppes and saw how tribe devoured tribe, how brother turned upon brother for a handful of cattle or a strip of land. There were no cities on Chogoris. There were no laws, only the wind, the grass, and the endless spiral of feuds and vengeance. Jaghatai hated it, not because he feared war, but because he knew it was war without purpose. When he came of age, Jaghatai challenged Ong Khan in the old way, a race across the Singing Dunes, 3 days and 3 nights, from the Ghost Ridge to the Black Pillars. Ong was old, but still cunning. He cut the stirrup on Jaghatai's saddle before the race, hoping to unseat him. But the boy rode low, clutching the mane of his steppe stallion, never faltering. At the finish, Ong collapsed, heart bursting, and Jaghatai arrived covered in sweat and sand. He dismounted, did not kneel, and took the old man's scimitar without a word. That was how he became Khan. In the years that followed, Jaghatai did not waste time on parades or tribal songs. He rode, he hunted, he called councils of war. He did what none before him had ever done. He sent emissaries to the rival tribes, not with threats but with truths. If we remain divided, we die divided. I will not ask for tribute. I will not ask for your loyalty. I will ask only that you ride with me to make an end of this chaos. Most laughed, some listened. The ones who mocked him found their yurts burned to ash in the night. The ones who listened found a new path opening before them, one that led not to dominance, but to something greater, a steppe without war, a brotherhood of free men. By the time he was 25, half the continent bore his mark. 3 red slashes on white felt, a storm glyph, a symbol of unity through strength. His warbands moved faster than any messenger could report. They struck raiders in mid-gallop. They ambushed slavers at waterholes. They liberated entire valleys without shedding a drop of blood, because by then his name alone brought fear. Not because he was cruel, but because he was certain. And then came the Palatine, a remnant of the old world. The Palatine ruled the high citadel of Kumkarta, the only bastion of the pre-darkness age left standing. She commanded gunships and skimmer squadrons, held power not through legend or strength, but through tech and the remnants of industry. When she saw the nomads uniting under Jaghatai's banner, she laughed from her throne of glass and titanium. She sent her emissaries, offered trade, treaties, even marriage. Jaghatai sent her emissaries back, without their tongues. War was inevitable. It began with precision. Jaghatai's scouts mapped every ravine, every dry riverbed, every moonlit trail around Kumkarta. His shamans charted the weather. His riders moved in silence, thousands of them, like shadows under moonlight. The Palatine sent out her tanks and gunships, but they found only mirages and dust storms. One by one, her convoys vanished, supply lines failed, fuel ran low. Then, at the height of the dry season, Jaghatai struck. It was not a siege, it was a storm. His outriders hit the perimeter defenses while the main host descended from the high steps. They were faster than drones, harder to target than missiles. In the confusion, Jaghatai himself rode through a breach in the walls on a white stallion, sword in hand, his warriors shouting old war cries over vox jammers. They reached the palace by nightfall. The Palatine tried to flee, but he found her in her panic chamber, surrounded by gold and plasma rifles that never fired. She asked him, before he took her head, "What kind of world will you build?" He said nothing. The future, to him, was not something spoken of. It was something ridden toward. With her death, Kumkarta fell. And with it, Chogoris changed. The satellite grids were restored, the skyways reopened. But the people did not build cities. They did not erect temples. Jaghatai would not allow it. A man should see the stars, he said, and a people should not grow fat behind walls. He rode from valley to valley, reforging the clans into a single people. The storm glyph became the banner of Chogoris. The nomads were not suppressed, they were celebrated. Tribal poetry, steppe wrestling, the old hunts, they remained. But the blood feud stopped. The sword, once a tool of slaughter, became a symbol of justice. All knew his law, all followed his word, yet even then there was restlessness in him. He would ride alone at dawn, disappearing for days into the silent wastes. When he returned, his eyes were distant. Some said he spoke to the stars, others said he sought a horizon he could never reach. And then one day the sky split open, and the Emperor came. But that is another story. This, then, is how the boy from the stars became the warhawk of the plains. Not through prophecy, not through miracle, but through will, vision, and fire. He was not born to rule. He rode to it. It was the dry season, and the winds howled over the Golar plateau like mourning ghosts. The grass was brittle, the soil cracked, and the herds had drifted far east towards the snowmelt rivers. Jaghatai Khan stood at the highest point of the Kashin range, eyes fixed on the western sky. His horse, pale as ash, pawed the ground and snorted, uneasy. Something was coming. The air felt heavy, as if the land itself held its breath. Then the stars fell. Not one, but many. Trails of burning white carved down from the upper atmosphere, shrieking like blades across stone. The Kagan did not flinch. Where others saw omens, he saw answers. Across Chogoris, the tribes stirred in fear. The Sky Riders whispered of ancient curses, of the gods returning in fire. But Jaghatai said nothing to his council. He rode alone for 2 days toward the impact sites, eating nothing, drinking only ice water from the cliffs. When he crested the final ridge of the northern steppes, he saw them, vast machines of gold and iron, shaped like cities, resting among the broken hills. They were not of Chogoris. The first men he met wore armor the color of sunlit steel and bore swords larger than a man's body. Their faces were blank behind visors of black. They did not speak, only raised hands in gesture of peace. Then the second man came, towering, radiant, and impossible. The Emperor. He did not announce himself. He simply walked forward like a man returning home from a long war. His eyes, it was said, were like twin suns, blinding if stared at too long, but warm in their regard. The Khagan did not kneel. He did not reach for his sword. He looked at the Emperor and asked, "Why are you here?" The Emperor smiled. "I have come to offer you a greater hunt." The War Council gathered at the foot of the wind, a sacred place among the northern cliffs. There, around a fire of blue stonewood, Jaghatai listened as the Emperor spoke of the stars, of a galaxy torn apart by ignorance and darkness. He told of his dream, a unified Imperium of mankind, where all tribes of Earth and beyond could ride under one banner, not as slaves, but as kin. He spoke of enemies that lived in the void, of monsters clothed in fire, of gods made from lies. The Khagan said little. He sipped fermented mare's milk and watched the fire twist. When the Emperor finished speaking, the flames died down and silence held for a long time. "My people are free," Jaghatai said finally. The Emperor nodded. "And they will remain so. You offer a master's leash. I offer a brother's road." Jaghatai stared at him, and for the first time in his life he did not see a man to challenge. He saw a horizon wider than any he had ever dreamed. 3 days later, he rode to Kumkarta's rebuilt plaza, stood atop the old tower where once the Palatine had watched over a broken world, and summoned all the chieftains of the tribes. They came on horseback, in sky cutters, even on foot across desert salt. Some came to support him, some came to test him. "I have ridden further than any man on this world," Jaghatai told them, "and now I ride further still. This world is no longer a battlefield, it is a saddle." He paused, and the wind howled through the towers. "The Emperor comes not to take our land, but to give us the stars." Some jeered, some knelt, all remembered. Later that evening, in the half-light of sunset, Jaghatai Khan placed his hand upon the hilt of his blade, lifted it before the Emperor and said, "My strength is yours. My sword, my storm, my sons, they ride with you." The oath was made, and so the rider of the steppes became a general of the stars. But joining the Imperium was no simple matter of banners and oaths. The people of Chogoris had lived free for generations. Now they would become a recruitment world, a foundry of warriors. At first, there was resistance. The plainsfolk were proud, their loyalty to their own blood deeper than any galactic dream. But Jaghatai made no apologies. He rode from clan to clan, not with soldiers but with words. He did not demand, he explained. "The Imperium is a greater tribe," he told them. "It rides not for power but for survival. You have seen the beasts in the stars. You have heard the whispers from the deep deserts. Alone we will fall. Together we run faster than any enemy." And so the people adapted. The first aspirants came from the northern clans, boys who could ride from the wind gulf to the bone wall in a single day without falling once. They were tested in blood, scarred by ritual, and taken into the stars. The apothecarians called them resilient, feral, instinctive. They learned the tongue of Mars with difficulty, but never forgot their own songs. They called Jaghatai Khagan still, even as he donned the eagle icon of the Imperium. The transition was not easy. The Luna Wolves, first among those who had met the Khan, sent envoys to assist the process. Some of them scoffed at the open traditions, at the steppe feasts and fire duels. One veteran sergeant named Haldren tried to silence a tribal rite with gunfire. Jaghatai beat him unconscious with the flat of his blade. "No man silences his brother's voice," he said. Word of this act spread to Horus himself, who visited Chogoris not long after. He and Jaghatai rode the perimeter of the southern crescent, their words private, their laughter carried by the wind. The War Master understood. The Khan, he said later, was not like the others. He did not scheme like Perturabo. He did not chafe like Russ. He did not philosophize like Magnus. He rides, Horus had said simply, and the galaxy rides with him. Over time, the integration of the Fifth Legion became complete. The White Tower of Quanzhou was constructed on Chogoris' central plateau, a fortress monastery of ivory and firestone. From its walls flew banners not of earth, but of steppe lightning and crimson sunbursts. Inside, the ancient rituals continued, but now they blended with the rites of the Astartes. The Khagan changed. He studied the Imperium's ways. He walked with Malkador. He spoke with Gilliman. He tested Dorn's fortresses, but he never bowed. He wore his storm-skin cloak atop his power armor, rode steeds of steel and flesh alike, and never allowed bureaucracy to dull his edge. To the Imperium, he was now Jaghatai Khan, Primarch of the Fifth Legion. To his people, he was still the Khagan. And from that day forward, the stars had new riders. The first time Jaghatai Khan saw what the Imperium called his legion, he did not recognize them. They were not like his sons from Chogoris. They bore no scars on their cheeks, no braids in their hair, no storm glyphs on their armor. Their banners were mismatched, their voices carried no songs. They called themselves star hunters, and they fought like ghosts, efficient, cold, deadly. But to the Khagan they were lost. They were not a brotherhood, they were a weapon with no soul. They had been forged on Terra long before the Khan ever rode across the empty quarter. Created in the first waves of the Emperor's gene labs, the V-Legion had been spread thin across the Great Crusade like scattered embers. Star Hunters they had been named, for they ranged ahead of the main fleet, chasing the flickering traces of old night across the void. They struck fast, struck hard, and vanished. For decades they had no father to guide them, no homeworld, no culture, only the cold language of war and the doctrine of destruction. They were respected, feared even, but among the other legions they were distant. Tools, not brothers. They obeyed, they did not sing. When the Khagan took command, many of these warriors expected a warlord with little interest in change. They expected a barbarian. What they found was a hurricane wrapped in silence. Jaghatai did not address them from a dais, nor speak of reforms in ornate halls. He rode to each company, scattered across dozens of sectors, and he watched. He observed their tactics, their discipline, their precision, and then he asked them, "Do you ride for a purpose or only for the kill?" Some resented the question, some ignored it, but the Khagan did not wait for permission. He summoned every Star Hunter company to Chogoris. Not a request, a command. It took 6 years for them all to arrive. One by one, drop ships fell from the skies of the homeworld they had never seen. Thunderhawks scarred the steppe with fire, and the tribes gathered on the ridges to watch the giants return. Tens of thousands of space marines, marked by the lightning bolt of the old V-Legion, gathered at Quanzhou. Their armor was chipped, their accents foreign, their loyalties frayed. Many had fought under other Primarchs during the early years of the Crusade. They brought with them different customs, different banners, and a dozen dialects. They were warriors, but not brothers. The Khagan knew what to do. He led them into the mountains. No armor, no weapons, only bone knives, canteens, and the clothes on their backs. The trek took 7 days, through fire-sand valleys and ice caves, over the shattered bridges of old Carta. At night they slept by shared fires. In the day they hunted their meals. He spoke little, but when he did, it was to tell the old stories of the great herd of the first rider, of the wind god who sacrificed his voice to give men the gift of the hunt. At the end of the 7th day they stood in the circle of storms, an ancient crater scarred by lightning for 1,000 years. And there, under the stars, he told them this: "You are not swords. You are not ghosts. You are not the claws of some distant master. You are riders now. You are the storm. From this moment forward, you fight not alone. You fight for each other, for the wind at your back and the brother to your left. You are white scars." He took a blade from his belt, a long curved tulwar carved from the bone of a steppe dragon, and carved 3 lines across his own cheek. Then he handed the blade to the next. One by one, the warriors of the 5th Legion took the scar. Not as punishment, as rebirth. It became ritual, the blooding. The scar marked not pain, but unity. It said, "I am not who I was. I am of the storm now." They shed their old colors, their patchwork insignias, their fleet-only designations, all stripped away. In their place came white armor, storm-marked, crimson flashes, lightning bolts etched across pauldrons, helmets painted bone-pale, not for glory, for clarity, so that when they rode, the enemy would know who had come for them. Some resisted. A few refused the scar. One captain, Dietrich Vulgor, a veteran of Ulanor, challenged the Kagean's methods, calling them superstitious, tribal, beneath the dignity of a space marine. Jaghatai listened. Then, in silence, he mounted his bike, drew his blade, and rode out across the red plain. He waited. Vulgor followed. They dueled for 3 hours. Not to the death, Jaghatai made that clear, but to the pain. When it ended, Vulgor lay in the dust, eyes to the sky, blood on his lips. The Kagan sheathed his blade and offered him a hand. Vulgor took it. He was the first Terran to carve the scar across his cheek of his own free will. That night the fires of unity burned bright. The transformation was not merely cultural. The Kagan overhauled doctrine. He restructured the Legion into brotherhoods, each led by a Khan, each capable of independent operation across entire star systems. Mobility was prioritized, not just in bikes, but in mindset. The White Scars were not fortress builders. They were raiders, liberators, fast attack masters. Where other legions would siege, the Scars would encircle. Where others would defend, they would hunt. Scout elements were doubled. Recon became as sacred as assault. To know the enemy before the strike was not cowardice, it was art. The Storm Seers, once kept at arm's length by the more rigid Terran commands, were given places of honor. Their visions, their weathercraft, their psychic hunts. These were folded into Legion doctrine as essential. The White Scars became something new, something terrifying. Not for the enemy, for the Imperium. Some called it nonconformity, others disobedience. But Guilliman, ever the bureaucrat, could not deny their results. The Scars conquered entire sectors with minimal losses. Their campaigns left no ruin, only submission. Where they passed, resistance vanished like dust before a storm wind. They were no longer forgotten. They were feared. Yet even in victory, the Kagan kept his distance from the throne world's politics. He attended war councils when required, but never lingered. He declined monuments. He refused titles. When Malkador once addressed him as warlord of the Eastern Fringe, the Kagan responded simply, "I am not a warlord. I am the storm. You cannot own the wind." The Star Hunters were gone. In their place rode the White Scars, and the galaxy would never forget the sound of their engines rising on the wind. The galaxy is not forged in fire alone. It is mapped, claimed, and ridden into submission. And none rode the stars like the White Scars. Once the Brotherhoods were born and the old ghost names burned away, Jaghatai Khan unleashed his sons upon the void. Not as conquerors in the traditional sense, not with siege lines and attritional wars, but as pathfinders, scouts of empire, ghosts ahead of the flame. Where other legions planted banners, the White Scars left dust and the sudden silence of victory. They became the Emperor's farthest riders, striking deep into the edges of unmarked stars. It began in the Hromus Drift, a star cluster hidden behind a dense band of gas and debris, thought impassable for fleets. Astropaths called it a dead zone. No way in, no way out, so the War Master had deemed it non-strategic. But the Khagans saw it differently. He sent 4 brotherhoods under the command of Primarch Khan, a Chogorian raised among the ice herds of the Uragan Range. His orders were simple: find a path. No grand fleet, no siege battalions, just speed. It took 42 days to chart the cyclone routes through the Horus Rift. The Scars moved in small hunter groups, riding storm eddies between black suns and collapsing planetoids. By the time they emerged, they had found 12 viable warp routes, encountered 5 lost human civilizations, and annihilated a xeno species known only as the Microt. They left no monuments, no declarations, only the Vox log that said, "The way is open." From that point on, the Scars were always first. They were the vanguard in the campaigns of the Garax Belt, cracking the orbital grids of the techno-pagan Selinar wards, while the Iron Hands still debated optimal bombardment patterns. They broke the slavery circuits of the Yakshi Combine in a single dawn assault, cutting the power nodes and freeing millions before the governing caste could activate their self-destruct fail-safes. They landed on Julo's Maw with 400 riders, all jet bikes, in a coordinated orbital descent so fast that the planet's defense network mistook it for atmospheric debris. By the time the first alarm sounded, the Khagans' standard was already planted in the capital. They became, as the Remembrancers later wrote, the shadow between warning and annihilation. Other legions began to take notice. The Blood Angels admired their precision. The Iron Warriors, who respected results above all, quietly began to mimic their rapid deployment tactics in some theaters. The Night Lords loathed them, calling them thunderflies and savage cowards. Jaghatai paid no mind. Praise and insult weighed equally little in his mind, both blown away by the wind. But it was Horus who understood them best. Time and again, the War Master requested the White Scars as auxiliaries for his campaigns. He trusted their independence. Where the Sons of Horus brought brute force and charisma, the Scars brought silence and certainty. Together, they broke the Haxan enclaves in a single synchronized campaign, Horus from above, Jaghatai from the shadows. There is an ancient Pict capture from the War Council that followed. It shows Horus laughing, holding a war mask of the Haxan chieftain in one hand and gesturing toward the Khagan with the other. The caption reads, "He didn't even knock." It became a point of pride among the Scars to be the first in and the last to be seen. Entire wars were won without a single formal declaration. They simply ended. The enemy command lines were decapitated, their leadership vanished, their supply chains burned on the wind, and the White Scars were gone before the main fleet arrived. But they were not savages. Those who fought alongside them, those who earned their trust, saw a different side. In the quiet hours after a campaign, the Scars would gather around fires built from broken wreckage and sing, not war songs, but epics, poems in Old Chogorian, verses that spoke of stars and ghosts and the silence of fathers. Remembrancers were invited to listen, rarely to write. One such account, recovered from a scholar named Ilyana Reth, describes a gathering on the glass wastes of Vagan IV. The Scars had just liberated the world from the Xenos Vrash, whose crystalline architecture still littered the plains like shattered knives. Instead of celebrating with drink or revelry, the Scars sat in a wide circle, passing a single iron horn between them, each reciting a line of verse. It lasted until dawn. Ilyana tried to write it down. They burned her journal. "Some songs are not for ink," they said. The Legion's internal order also evolved in these years. The Brotherhoods developed specialized roles. The Kashig, the elite guard, became both bodyguards and judges, enforcing the Khagan's will without hesitation. The Stormseers grew in prominence, their psychic talents intertwined with battlefield command. Their weather lore was not metaphor. On the day of broken skies, a Stormseer named Torgen twisted an entire planet's wind systems into a death cyclone, grounding enemy aircraft and scattering tank divisions like toys in the dust. Not magic, mastery. They also developed the habit of marking every world they liberated, not with statues but with scars. A single shallow trench carved in a wide spiral outside the main city. No text, no symbol, just a mark. When asked, the Khagan explained, "The storm leaves its trail. Let the wind speak." These were not worlds claimed. They were worlds awakened. But with renown came suspicion. Some within the administratum, those who prized predictability, began to worry. The White Scars operated too freely. They did not always report. They changed orders mid-flight. They trusted instinct over protocol. And they did not build. Unlike the Ultramarines who constructed fortresses and roadways in every new compliance zone, the Scars left behind only dust. Some said they lacked loyalty, others whispered of arrogance. To this the Khagan said only, "We ride. We do not root." There were whispers that the Scars were growing too wild, that they remembered the steppe more than the Imperium, that Jaghatai's silence was not humility, but scorn. But the truth was simpler. The Khagan saw the Imperium as a storm, ever expanding, unstoppable. But storms must move, or they collapse. To him, stagnation was death. Bureaucracy was a trap. The minute a warrior paused to build a monument, he became its slave. And so he kept his legion in motion. It was not defiance. It was freedom. Aboard the Swordstorm, the Khagan wrote in his private log, "Let others hold the walls. Let others guard the thrones. We will be the blade that cuts the path. And when the war ends, we will ride into silence, and none shall say we lingered. No plaques, no shrines, just open stars and the thunder of engines." Thus the great crusade surged on, and the White Scars rode before it, ghosts in the void, hunters of the hidden path. They left no chains, only scars. It was said among the brotherhoods that when a white scar falls, the wind mourns. Not with wailing or fury, but with silence. A long, heavy stillness that wraps the steppe in still air and still hearts. That silence, that sacred breath between death and memory, was not a superstition. It was faith. And in the White Scars, faith was a blade sharper than any power sword. To understand them, you had to understand that they were not merely warriors. They were stormwalkers, spirit riders, sons of a creed older than Terra itself. They did not worship in chapels or quote catechisms from catechists' tongues. Their faith was lived, not preached, spoken in wind, seen in scars, felt in the thunder of hooves across grasslands. To outsiders, it was primitive. To the Khagan and his sons, it was the only truth that mattered. The Imperium never fully grasped this. Most of its architects didn't try. By decree of the Emperor, the imperial truth reigned supreme. A doctrine of cold logic, absolute materialism, and atheistic clarity. There were no gods, no spirits, no ghosts riding the storm, just man, his tools, and his destiny. The White Scars listened to these teachings. They nodded when the remembrancers spoke of reason and science. But in their hearts, they remembered the steppe. They remembered the tension, the honored dead who rode beside the living in dreams. They remembered the wind singers, old shamans whose drums once called lightning from clear skies. And they remembered the stories of the first rider who leapt from the stars on a flaming horse and carved the horizon open with a crescent blade. These things were not myths, they were memory. echoes that lived in blood and scar. Jaghatai did not forbid such beliefs. He nurtured them, quietly, without fanfare. His warriors practiced calligraphy not for decoration, but as meditation. Each brushstroke was a reflection of the rider's soul, a storm caught in ink. Their armor was inscribed with Chogorian verses, lines of poetry that read like war cries in rhythm, but prayers in meaning. Some of these scripts were so old, even the storm seers could not translate them. But they were painted anyway, because the meaning lived in the motion. Among themselves, the Brotherhood spoke of three spirits: the wind, the blade, and the sky. The wind was freedom, unfettered, untamed, always moving. The White Scars hated sieges not out of strategy, but out of nature. To remain still was to die. The wind did not tarry, neither did they. The blade was duty, not just to kill, but to cut cleanly, a scar properly made, healed, a wound left to fester destroyed. This was how they fought, not with indulgent bloodlust, but with exacting purpose. They saw war not as brutality, but surgery. And the sky? The sky was eternity, the place where ancestors rode after death. Every White Scar, no matter his rank, no matter his victories, would one day ride to the sky. And if his deeds were worthy, the wind would carry his name to the next storm. These weren't metaphors. They were the way of the storm, and the storm seers, the librarians of the White Scars, were more than psychers. They were bridges between worlds, not just conduits of the warp, but interpreters of dreams, readers of omens, guides through the soul's vast silence. Targutai Yesuge, chief storm seer of the 5th Legion, was the embodiment of that role. He wore robes of plain gray over his armor, braided his hair with charms made from the bones of his fallen brothers, and carried a staff wrapped in cracked white leather. He could split tanks with a gesture, scatter Thunderhawk squadrons with cyclone winds, but he preferred to speak softly. His strength was not only in stormcraft, but in wisdom. It was said that Yasuge once calmed a duel between rival Khans by reciting an epic poem from beginning to end, a tale so long and old it was only remembered by fire shamans in the deep south. By the time it ended, neither warrior remembered why they had drawn blades. He and the Khagan rarely spoke in public, but when they did, it was in Chogorian verse, low and precise, like drumbeats echoing through fog. Many feared the storm seers, not just outside the Legion, but within. The Emperor had always been wary of psychers. Librarians across the legions were regulated, scrutinized, sometimes outright forbidden. Magnus the Red, the most powerful of their kind, had already begun to attract whispers of heresy. But the White Scars did not fear their storm seers. They revered them, because they saw the soul behind the power. To be a storm seer was not to control the storm, it was to listen to it. Even their warcraft reflected this balance. A White Scar did not simply ride into battle. He composed it, like a song, like a hunt. Movements were choreographed with precision, not by command, but by intuition. Riders flowed together like wind across ridges, spear tips of velocity, not blunt fists. To march was a punishment. To stand still was to shame your ancestors. In the Battle of Olvaris Secundus, the Iron Hands dug trenches for 3 weeks, constructed kill boxes and overlapping fire fields. They fortified ridge after ridge with auto turrets and macro batteries. The White Scars arrived in a dust storm. They circled behind the enemy force, used storm calls to blind orbital sensors, and then dropped their entire assault force from low-flying carriers into the canyon mouths. Within 22 minutes, the battle was over. The enemy had no idea who had killed them. The Iron Hands didn't speak of it, but they never invited the Scars to another joint campaign. The White Scars did not care. They did not seek validation. They did not inscribe glories on stone walls. They sang of them in firelight, then rode on, because nothing to them was worse than the weight of stillness. Even among the brotherhoods there were rituals for this. The hunt of the distant storm was a rite taken by warriors who felt the silence creeping in. When one became too restless, too blood-hungry, or too numb, they were sent alone to track and slay a chosen prey. Often a warlord, a sorcerer, a Xenos beast whose name had reached Chogoris through whispers. They went without backup. They returned or they did not. But those who returned always bore a new scar, sometimes on the face, sometimes on the soul. And when they sat by the fire again, they spoke little, but the silence was understood. This was the heart of the 5th Legion, not its engines, not its blades, its silence, not empty, not absent, but watchful, listening. Because the wind speaks only when all else is quiet, and the white scars, true white scars, knew how to hear it. That is why they never broke. That is why they never lost themselves. They followed the way of the storm, and the storm never stops. The skies above Kondax were never quiet. They shimmered with static and starlight, the ion-rich clouds crackling with violet arcs that danced like spirits across the heavens. Beneath them sprawled a world half jungle, half bone field, where endless thunder echoed through the valleys, not from storms, but from war. War that was meant to end quickly, war that did not. The white scars had come to Kondax as pathfinders, as they always did, fast, sharp, with little fanfare. The orcs had infested the system in predictable numbers, crude skyforts, rusting gargants, and teeming hordes that bellowed war cries into the void, as if the stars might answer back. The Khagan's orders were clear: sweep and purge. The greenskins would die, and the way through the sector would be opened for the next wave of the crusade. A clean-cut campaign, sharp, swift. But Kondax didn't end. It dragged on. The orcs died by the thousands, tens of thousands. Their fortresses burned, their skyships shattered. And yet they never stopped. For every stronghold leveled, 2 more seemed to rise. For every war boss slain, another claimed his place. The brotherhoods began to fracture under strain, not in spirit, but in deployment. They were stretched thin across multiple worlds, fighting a war that no longer behaved like a war. It was a tide, a cycle, an unending hunt with no finish line. Still, the Khagan said nothing. He rode with the 3rd Brotherhood across the sands of Akshur Prime, his blade slick with orc ichor, his mind on the patterns of the foe. Something was wrong. The enemy fought with fury, yes, but there was method in their madness. Positions collapsed too easily, retreats were staged, supply caches were untouched. The orcs, blunt instruments of slaughter, had begun using feints. That was not in their nature. And Jaghatai Khan knew nature. He began to pull his forces tighter, consolidate the lines. Scout patterns were redrawn. Storm seers cast readings not just across the wind, but across the warp. What they found was silence, an unnatural kind. No psychic echoes, no data returns from astropathic beacons beyond the system. No word from Terra, no word from Horus. The galaxy had gone quiet, too quiet. The truth came like a wound. A burst transmission pierced the silence, a garbled cry from Rogel Dawn, distorted by warp interference and time lag. In the echoing vox chambers aboard the Sword Storm, the Khagan stood unmoving as the message played. Horus, treachery. Istvan, Sanguinius, wounded, the Emperor betrayed. It came in fragments, pieces of a broken puzzle smeared with blood. The sons of Horus had turned. The War Master had raised his banner against the Golden Throne. The galaxy was on fire. And then another transmission, clear, strong, and unmistakably false, from Horus himself. Brother, the Emperor has lost his vision. Leman Russ has gone mad. I seek to preserve the Imperium, not destroy it. Join me. You will ride free under my banner. Let no lies bind you. Come to me at Prospero, and I will show you the truth." The two messages were daggers aimed at the same heart. Jaghatai said nothing for a long time. He gathered his Khan priests, his storm seers, and his most trusted captains. He laid out the messages side by side and said only this: "We ride to find the truth. If it flees, we chase. If it lies, we cut." But even as he moved to act, the trap snapped shut. The Alpha Legion came not with war cries, but with silence. Their ships emerged from the blackness beyond Kondax's outer moons, their hulls cold, their signals masked beneath Imperial transponder codes. Before the White Scars could react, half a dozen listening posts had vanished, annihilated with surgical strikes. Vox towers fell, survey stations blinked out. When the alarms rang across the Brotherhood fleets, the enemy was already inside the system. It wasn't the Orcs. It never had been. The Kondax campaign had been a leash, a delaying action, a grave dug wide and slow. The Alpha Legion had been here from the beginning. Their attack was a whisper. White Scar advance teams found their own watchtowers turned against them. Gun emplacements, once manned by brothers, now spat death with foreign hands. Communications were jammed with false signals. A patrol of the 7th Brotherhood disappeared entirely, last seen entering the Ashen Reef Belt, their final Vox transmission ending mid-sentence with a scream and static. It wasn't just war, it was disintegration. And still the Coggin did not flinch. He gathered his brotherhoods at Orlok's edge, a clifftop bastion overlooking the steaming jungles of the main continent. There, beneath the open sky, he gave orders not in rage but with razor clarity. "Break orbit, regroup in high atmosphere, we ride out of this system or burn it behind us." Not all agreed. Hasik Noyan Khan, commander of the 2nd Brotherhood and one of the most respected warriors of the Legion, argued for caution. He believed the Kondax campaign could still be salvaged, that perhaps the message from Horus was not a lie, but a truth the Imperium refused to see. Jaghatai listened. Then he looked Hasik in the eyes and said, "The wind changes. I feel its teeth. If you do not ride, you will be left behind." The escape became a legend. The Alpha Legion fleet, now revealed in full, closed in on the Scars like a tightening net. Their ships mirrored the hull patterns of the Scars' own vessels. Vox chatter was infiltrated, orders intercepted and redirected. Friendly signals were faked. Boarding torpedoes struck at the hearts of White Scar's capital ships. One flagship, the Veil Unbroken, was lost with all hands when Alpha Legion saboteurs triggered a plasma reactor overload from within. But then the Coggin gave the command: form the chisel, break the blade. It was an ancient formation, rarely used, often suicidal. A tight wedge of assault ships, angled to punch through an enemy line at maximum velocity, engines burning red-hot. Each vessel a spearhead, each captain ready to die. The Sword Storm led the charge. What followed was not a battle. It was an act of pure violence. The White Scars fleet tore through the Alpha Legion blockade like lightning through dry brush. Boarding parties were ejected into the void mid-breach. Storm Seers called down ion-charged detonations from low orbit to blind sensors. Strike cruisers weaved through the wreckage of burning hulls, riding the shock waves of their own detonations. The sky turned red, the clouds broke apart, and the White Scars vanished into the warp. They did not run. They regrouped. In the dark between stars, the Coggin stood in the shrine of ancestors aboard his ship. He looked at the scar etched across his reflection on the polished steel of his blade. The galaxy had changed. The storm was here. The White Scars, once pathfinders, were now something else. Not the hunters, not the hunted, but the knife in the storm, unsheathed and ready. They did not know what awaited them at Prospero, only that they would ride, because that is what the Khagan did. And the wind at last had turned. There is a moment in every storm where the wind dies, just for a breath, a silence too sharp to be peace. It is the breath before the thunder cracks the earth, before lightning splits the sky. That was what it felt like, aboard the sword storm, in the hours after Kondax. The White Scars had escaped, but escape was not victory. The trap had been sprung, and now the horizon was hidden behind lies. The fleet rode the warp in silence. Orders were few. Even among the brotherhoods there was restraint. No songs, no laughter over victory. Just clipped murmurs, weapon checks, quiet sharpening of blades. The storm had not passed, it had only shifted. And at its center stood a man who had not slept in days. Jaghatai Khan stood alone in the Chamber of Winds, high in the prow of his flagship. The walls were etched in Chogorian script, verses from the Book of Storms, words written not by poets, but riders. Dust from the steppe mixed with engine oil on the floor. A single candle burned before him, its flame unmoved by the ship's subtle tremors. The Khagan stared into it, silent. He had read both messages again. One from Dawn, one from Horus. Truth clashed with familiarity. Loyalty warred with instinct. Horus had been a brother, a friend, the only one among the Primarchs who had not tried to shape Jaghatai like a tool. While Guilliman measured and Perturabo lectured, Horus had simply ridden beside him, trusted him, laughed with him. The War Master had understood what it meant to ride the edge of a storm, but the message from Terra had not been fabricated. Dawn's voice, frantic, ragged, was real. It carried the weight of pain, not performance. It named the massacre at Istvan. It spoke of the Emperor's wound. It begged for help. The Khagan did not trust messages. He trusted the wind. And it whispered of fire. He summoned his council. They gathered in the Yurt of Storms, a tactical holodome repurposed in the image of an old nomad tent, complete with curved beams and woven banners hanging from the steel. Incense smoke curled through vents, masking the metallic tang of recycled air. The floor was bare metal covered in scarlet steppe wool, soft beneath armored boots. Around the circle stood the Brotherhood Khans, storm seers, and war priests. Shaiben Khan, ever grim, with his jet bike helm under one arm. Torgun Khan, broad-shouldered and restless. Hasik Noyan Khan stood at the rear, arms folded, eyes unreadable. And Yasuge, the chief storm seer, sat cross-legged by the fire altar, lips moving in quiet verse. The Khagan entered without fanfare. No salutes, no preamble. Speak. It was not a command, it was permission. Shiban spoke first. Dawn's message is truth. If Terra burns, we must return. Torgun disagreed. We know nothing. We follow a voice from a box. For all we know, Dawn is dead. Or worse, compromised. Yasuge said nothing, only stared into the incense flame. Then Hasik spoke. We could ride to Horus. Silence. The words sat in the air like a drawn blade. Hasik's voice was level. He has not moved against us. He sent no fleet to Kondax. He asked us to join him. That is not the act of an enemy. It is the act of a brother. We should hear him out. Shiban's hand moved to the hilt of his tulwar. You would ride with traitors? I would find the truth, Hasik replied, and not throw ourselves into a fire lit by another. The Khagan said nothing, just watched. The room cracked, tense and sharp, voices raised. Some called for war, others for patience. Some demanded they return to Chogoris and defend their homeworld. Some whispered of neutrality. Jaghatai raised one hand. The wind returned. We will not choose between ghosts, he said, not on words alone. He paced slowly, arms behind his back. Dawn calls us to Terra. Horus calls us to Prospero. We ride to the ruins. We see with our own eyes. Prospero. Once it had been a beacon, a world of scholars, a sanctuary of knowledge, where the thousand suns built glass towers and plumbed the secrets of the warp. Now it was a grave. The space wolves had left it in ruin, glassed from orbit, its cities crushed beneath kinetic fire and flame. Jaghatai Khan brought his fleet to its edge like a hunter circling a wounded beast. Scars descended in drop ships, landing on fractured stone and fused sand. They moved in silence, guns half raised, blades loose. Ghosts lingered. The ruins whispered. Statues wept blood from cracked eyes. Even the wind was wrong. It blew against gravity, upward into the stars, as if trying to flee. And then he saw it. A figure cloaked in crimson light, standing in the heart of Tizca's central crater. Magnus, or what remained of him. The Kagan approached alone. Stormseers tried to stop him. Shiban warned him. Even Hasik, bold with words before, stood silent now. But the Kagan rode forward on foot, tulwar sheathed. He found the Crimson King amid broken stone and shattered books. "You should not have come," said Magnus. "Then why are you here?" Jaghatai replied. The shade smiled. "To offer you what no one else will. Understanding." It was not a conversation. It was a duel, a philosophy, of memory, of wounds. Magnus spoke of betrayal, of the Emperor's lies, of Horus's truth. He spoke of chains, of destinies carved in ignorance, of brothers used as tools in a war they never asked for. He showed visions, of Terra in flames, of Malkador in shadow, of the warp as it truly was. Not chaos, but choice. Jaghatai listened. He saw it all. And then he laughed. Not cruelly, not mockingly. He laughed like a man watching a snake try to fly. "You never understood," he said. "Not the Emperor, not yourself, not us." He drew his blade, not to strike, but to cut the vision apart. And the ghost dissolved into ash. He returned to his ship without a word. The council gathered again. This time there was no debate. The Kagan stood before them and spoke quietly. "We go to Terra," Torgun asked. "And Horus? If he stands in our path, we ride through him." Then he turned to Hasik. "You said you sought truth?" Hasik bowed his head. "And I have found it." "Good." The Kagan stepped closer. "Now remember it, and do not forget which way the wind blows." No ceremony, no cheers, just the tightening of grips on weapons. The nods exchanged between battle brothers, the tension before the hunt. The white scars turned their ships toward Sol, and the thunder began to build. They had seen the lie, and now they would carve the truth with fire. The void around Prospero was colder than the others remembered. It wasn't the cold of distance or the chill that slips through the walls of ancient starships. It was the cold of a place that no longer wanted to be remembered. A dead world wrapped in silence, left to rot in the shadow of betrayal. The kind of silence that didn't settle, it clung. The fleet of the white scars held above the world like a blade at a throat. Battle-scarred strike cruisers ran silent, formation tight and ready for war, their lights dimmed, their cannons loaded, but still. Each ship's deck hummed with tension, every brother on edge. Not out of fear, but out of knowing. A knowing that whatever remained below them was not the same world the thousand suns had once called home. Prospero had been broken. Jaghatai Khan stood on the observation deck of the Sword Storm, looking down on the planet through a translucent obsidian screen carved in the shape of a falcon's eye. The image that met his gaze was not unfamiliar. It mirrored the aftermath of so many compliance wars, cities ground into sand, mountains shattered by orbital fire, the sky a permanent ash storm. But this was not a conquered world. This was a murdered one, and the killer had not run. "Even in ruins," Prospero whispered. The drop to Tiska, once the Thousand Suns' glittering jewel, was made in silence. The Khan did not bring his full strength. Only a handful of hand-picked warriors accompanied him, riders of the First Brotherhood, led by Chin Shah of the Keshig. Stormseers followed in silence, their runes bound, their visions dulled to a whisper. A single drop craft descended through the storms, its hull scorched from repeated breaches through the warp over Kondax. The ruins welcomed them with open silence. Once Tiska had been a spire-laced marvel, white towers crowned in gold, reflecting the stars with arrogant perfection. Now it was glass, not broken, not crushed, melted. The entire city had been turned to slag. The white had turned black. The gold was ash. Buildings slumped like wax figures exposed to a forge. The plaza where Magnus had once welcomed diplomats from Terra was now a crater filled with dust and bone. The scars disembarked without words. Engines quiet, boots crunching over vitrified stone. The only sound was the wind, a low moan, unnatural, wrong. It didn't move like wind. It moved like breath, a dying breath, a breath full of memory. The Stormseers halted. They felt it. This place remembered. The first apparition came without warning. Chinsaw was moving toward a collapsed dome when he froze, his hand drifting toward his blade. The others followed his gaze and saw it. A figure, hooded, flickering like smoke. Its form was unclear, robed in tattered crimson, with a golden eye bleeding from its forehead. It did not move. It simply stared. Then it spoke, not with sound but with pressure. A memory. The image of a boy standing in a great library. The floor was obsidian. The walls were whispering. Behind the boy stood a giant, a figure with burning red skin, and a single gleaming eye resting one hand on the boy's shoulder. Then it was gone. In its place, only wind. Jaghatai turned to Yasuge, who was already kneeling, his fingers brushing the ground. "Not demons," the Stormseer muttered. "Not ghosts. These are echoes, wounds that do not heal." "The city is still screaming," Chinsha said softly. "Then let it scream," Jaghatai replied. And they pressed forward. They passed through empty libraries, their shelves incinerated into curling black shapes. Mummified psychers, fused to the walls like insects in amber, stared with eyes that no longer blinked. There were sigils everywhere, etched into the bones of buildings, burned into the sky itself. Symbols that refused translation. Some pulsed, some bled. Yasuge warned the others not to speak. Even a name might be heard. They crossed what remained of the central forum, where statues of the Primarch had once towered. One still stood, half melted, one arm raised as if in defiance of its own ruin. At its base, a symbol had been carved post-destruction, not by fire but by blade, a wolf's fang. Jaghatai said nothing, but his eyes narrowed. He had known Leman Russ since the earliest days. He had fought beside the Space Wolves on half a dozen campaigns, respected their fury, if not their restraint. But this was not justice. This was punishment. This was madness given form. Then a second apparition. This time it came not in vision, but in sound. A scream, high, ragged, looping, but not from the sky, not from the warp, from the street. A man ran toward them, naked, burned, eyes white with flame. He moved like a marionette, every limb twitching, dislocated. His mouth was open, the scream unending. As he neared the white scars, he stumbled, collapsed, and turned to dust. The dust rose, formed a shape. Magnus, or what remained of him, not his body, his essence, projected through the warp like a final breath. He stood before Jaghatai, silent, and then he spoke, not aloud, not with the false sweetness he'd used on the others. This was rage. You did not stop it. The Kagan did not reply. You knew what was happening. You saw the signs. You let Russ burn my home. You call yourself free, but you serve a throne. The projection flared. I tried to warn you. I showed you truth. And I saw it, Jaghatai said quietly. I saw what you did with it. Magnus's shade snarled. You will die for your ignorance. No, the Khagan whispered, drawing his blade. I will live in spite of yours. He stepped forward, and the shade shattered, not with a scream, but with a laugh. In the stillness that followed, the ground cracked beneath their boots. Warp ripples tore through the street. Ghosts screamed. The dead remembered, and the white scars stood their ground. Yasuge knelt, burned his palms on the stone, and cast the final reading. The warp is broken here, he whispered. Not poisoned, betrayed. Jaghatai looked across the ruins. Then we've seen enough. The storm seer hesitated. There is more. The Khagan shook his head. Number, there is only one truth here. He turned to his men. Magnus is gone, his legion with him. Russ has no answers. Horus sent us here to waste time. This place is a lie, and we will not ride in circles any longer. He looked up at the sky through the storm. Set course for Sol. As the scars returned to their ship, the winds howled louder. Not words, not voices, but names. Names of those who had died here. Names of those who had watched their world burn. Names of the forgotten. And then, as the swordstorm rose from orbit, a final whisper passed through the comms. A voice, dry as dust, spoke only once. Brother. Jaghatai did not respond. He closed his eyes and rode on. The warp storms churned like angry gods as the sword storm surged through them, its hull singing with strain. Lightning forked across the Geller field, casting flickering shadows through the chapel decks. To the men of lesser armies, such storms would be enough to drive them mad, to crack their faith, to bring out the old superstitions about monsters scratching at the void between worlds. But the White Scars did not fear storms. They rode them. Yet even the sons of the storm knew something was wrong. There was tension aboard the fleet, not the edge of battle thrill they relished, but something colder, a wound beneath the armor. Whispers moved between decks like ghosts. Whole sections of Vox relays went silent without reason. Supply shipments vanished. Names disappeared from duty rosters. It wasn't sabotage. Not yet. It was something worse. It was hesitation. The seeds had been sown long before Kondax, in quiet lodge meetings behind sealed bulkheads, in old Terran tongues spoken far from the Khagan's eye. The so-called warrior lodges, born in the dark of the Luna campaign, spread like a contagion through the legions. They had offered brotherhood, tradition, and shared glory. But now they offered something else. Doubt. And doubt had reached the White Scars. Hasik Noyan Khan stood before the map shrine in his private quarters, watching warp tides flicker on the hologlobe like bruises across a body. His face was calm, his posture as sharp as ever, but his eyes were already far away. He had once been Jaghatai's most trusted war captain, a master of flanking maneuvers, a rider whose deeds in the Glass Rebellion of Hissos had become legend among the Fifth. But war and legend were not the same, and Hasik had grown weary of silence, weary of chasing ghosts. He remembered a different war, one with direction, with vision, the one Horus promised. In his hand he held the coded transmission again. Not a message from Horus this time. This one was from Torgun Khan. Not a Primarch, a brother. And in it were 3 words, ancient and final. It is time. They struck just as the fleet reached the edge of the Prospero Corridor, a narrow stable route in the warp that would take them closer to Terra. The Scars had gathered for the transit, engines hot, shields tested, weapons primed. But aboard the Swordstorm the bridge lights flickered, then failed. In the darkness, the first blade was drawn. It began in silence, not fanfare, not gunfire. Just a single officer, the Vox Master Couraid, turning from his station and slitting the throat of the servitor beside him. Then another, then another. The bridge flared with lass fire. The traitors moved fast, coordinated, ruthless. They wore white scars markings, but their eyes were hollow, their scars drawn in ritual, not remembrance. They fought not with fury, but resolve. In the lower decks, mutiny blossomed, bulkheads sealed, armories were emptied, whole sections of the crew turned on their brothers. Lodges activated their sleeper cells. Battle brothers who had trained together, hunted together, now fell upon each other in close quarters with knives, chainswords, and brutal fists. The traitors bore no marks of the War Master, no heretical sigils, no battle cries to dark gods. Just cold eyes, and the word freedom. Jaghatai Khan was on the outer hull when the attack began. He stood in a grav-sealed pressure shrine atop the sword storm, exposed to the stars, reciting the dawn canticle in the old Chogorian tongue. It was a rite of travel, a tradition older than the Imperium itself. Each verse was a memory of a journey survived, a map not on paper but in spirit. The wind changed. He felt it not on his skin but in his blood, a tension behind the silence. He turned, eyes narrowing, and spoke one word into his helm's Vox circuit. Shiban. No response. Again, Shiban Khan, report. Nothing. The storm had broken. Far below, on deck 12, Shiban Khan was bleeding. He crouched behind a ruined conduit, blade slick with blood, breath short. Around him his brothers lay fallen, not by enemy fire, by hands they once trusted. His squad had been ambushed en route to the drop void, caught between false Vox orders and sealed blast doors. Only he had survived. He pressed his back to the wall, pain blooming across his ribs, and watched as armored feet approached. Torgun Khan stepped into view, still clad in white scars armor, his face bare, his expression blank. "You could have joined us, Shibane," Torgun said. "I have," Shibane spat. "Just not you." Torgun gave a sad smile, almost pitying. "We serve the same master, only ours still listens." Behind him more traitors appeared, fellow scars all bearing the lodge tattoos. None bore chaos marks, none looked crazed, they looked determined. "Freedom from what?" Shiban growled. "From loyalty? From honor? From the Khan?" "From stagnation," Torgun replied. "From a future written by men who call us beasts while sending us to die. Horus understands. He values us. Jaghatai sits in silence, blind, while the galaxy burns." Shiban rose, blade raised. "He sees more than you ever will." And then he attacked. The duel between them was fast, brutal, elegant, filled with the kind of ferocity only shared blood could produce. Tulwar against scimitar, strike and counter-strike, each a poem of death in motion. The others watched. None interfered. This was personal. In the end, Shibane fell, but not to Torgun. From behind the traitor, a blur of white and gold descended. A power blade flashed. Torgun cried out, cut down at the knees by Jaghatai Khan himself. He fell, coughing blood. "You should have ridden with me," the Khan whispered. Torgun looked up, mouth full of defiance, and Jaghatai drove his blade through his throat. Across the fleet the tide turned. The loyalists rallied. The Keshig struck with surgical fury. Storm seers unleashed lightning through the warp-drenched halls, frying traitors mid-chant. The bridge of the sword storm was retaken, its consoles soaked in blood. Shiban survived, barely, pulled from the wreckage by his brothers. Hasik was found in the command sanctuary, already in chains, flanked by silent guards. He said nothing as Jaghatai entered, only offered a quiet, "I did what I believed was right," "And you believed wrong," the Khagan answered. "He didn't execute him. Not yet. Instead, he turned to his warriors. Those who betrayed us will ride one last time. The Magyar Mazan, the Red Hunt, a death sentence cloaked in duty. They would lead the next assault, first in. No rescue, no return. Their names would not be remembered, but they would atone. The white scars did not linger. Repairs were made, blood was cleaned, names were crossed from the rolls, and the fleet turned toward Terra. But the scars remained. Brothers had fallen, not to blade but to belief. And Jaghatai Khan, silent, resolute, rode to war with fire in his heart, not just to defend the throne, but to burn out the rot that had crept into his own blood. The storm was now behind them. Ahead was fire, and fire purifies. The stars had changed, not visibly, not to the crew of the Sword Storm, who saw only pinpricks of white in an infinite dark, but to the Storm Seers, those attuned to patterns beneath patterns. The galaxy had tilted. The warp no longer whispered, it screamed. Jaghatai Khan stood on the command dais of his flagship, one hand resting on the hilt of his blade, the other holding an iron data slate engraved with a single, jagged symbol. It was not a rune. It was a map, or a wound, depending on how one looked at it. Behind him, the fleet floated like hunting birds, battered, bloodied, but unbroken. Their number had thinned after the betrayal. The traitors who had once walked among them now rode the Red Hunt, their lives spent in doomed boarding actions and suicidal assaults, earning honor with blood they had already forfeited. Now the Legion faced a different kind of enemy, time. The War Master was ahead, Terra was far, and the paths were no longer clear. The warp had turned against them. Passage to the Sol system, once hard but known, had become a storm wall. Whole routes had vanished, swallowed by roiling warp eddies. Others were suicide corridors, crawling with traitor patrols, warp-born predators, and star snares that devoured entire fleets. Horus had planned well. He had drawn the scars to Kondax, delayed them, tried to turn them, then tried to break them. And now, with his rebellion in full fury, he sought to deny them the road home. The white scars refused to yield, but the path would not be a straight one. For months the Legion moved like ghosts. They rode the void at the edges of the traitors' influence, slipping between warp flares and false beacon signals. They struck where they could, quick raids against word-bearer vessels, lightning ambushes on traitor supply ships, brief but brutal engagements that left wreckage in their wake and sowed confusion among Horus's war hosts. But they could not linger. Each victory cost time, and Terra had no time left to spare. Guilliman was gone, cut off beyond the ruin storm. The Lion's fleet was nowhere to be found. Sanguinius was wounded. Vulcan had vanished. Only Dorn stood between Horus and the Emperor, and even he would fall without aid. The White Scars had to return. Had to. But the stars themselves conspired against them. It was in the shadow of the ruined world of Sadava, orbiting a dying sun, that hope revealed itself. The system had once been a pre-imperial colony, a Xenos-human hybrid culture, long dead by the time the White Scars arrived. The ruins bore signs of advanced technology, faded glyphs carved into obsidian obelisks, and underground vaults deeper than orbital augurs could see. Yesuge, the chief storm seer, felt the presence before they landed. Something old, something watching. What they found beneath the dust was not a weapon. It was a doorway. They called it dark glass, a structure, spherical, suspended within a shaft of voidstone hundreds of meters deep. It hummed with impossible frequency, resonating not with sound but thought. The Stormseers could not touch it directly. Those who tried wept blood and collapsed in spasms. Even the Khagan, fearless as he was, did not enter its inner field. But they learned. Over days of silent study, Yasuge pieced it together, not through translation but through sensation. Dark glass was not a weapon. It was not a shield. It was a key, a relic of the long-dead past, a creation of a civilization that had once known how to cut through the warp without being seen. The Eldar had their webway. This was something else, cruder, more brutal, but real. A path through the storm, a hidden corridor, a forbidden road. But it came with a price. The device required sacrifice, not symbolic, real. Energy beyond power cells, beyond reactors. It needed a will, a soul woven into the warp, burning as fuel. Something strong enough to open the road, but not survive the crossing. Yasuge volunteered. Of course he did. No, the Khagan said. We find another way. There is no other, the Stormseer replied. This is the storm. I walk it so you may ride. You are my oldest friend. And so I choose this. There was no argument after that, only silence and preparation. The rite took 3 days. On the first day, the Stormseers painted the corridor walls in blood and ink, sketching Chogorian verses alongside warp script that no tongue could speak. They sang songs no human had ever written, songs the warp remembered. On the second day, the warriors of the Legion gathered in the great vault. They did not watch. They stood vigil, blades drawn, engines idling. Every brother ready to strike should demons come clawing through the breach. And on the third day, Yasuge walked into the sphere. His body burned. His voice echoed, not in pain, but in memory. Let the sky split, he said, and the wind rise. Let the storm hear me. The vault tore, reality cracked, and the road opened. It was not like a warp jump. There was no madness, no screaming, no visions of old sins. The sword storm and its sister ships slipped through the rift like knives through silk. Time stuttered, then flowed. The stars blurred. The passage was narrow. Twice they were nearly torn apart by gravitational knots. Once a demonic predator, vast, winged, and skeletal, saw them, screamed, and was flung away by the field's backlash. No one spoke. No one breathed. They rode. And then, terror. They emerged above the Sol system like a returning storm. The white scars arrived in silence, but terror heard them nonetheless. Sensors flared. Alarms screamed. The sword storm broke through the defensive net, broadcasting ancient ident codes lost since the First Crusade. Aboard the Phalanx, Rogel Dorn stood still, watching the feed with clenched fists. They had come. They had come. There was no celebration, no parades, no banners, only orders, coordinates, battle plans. The traitors had landed. The walls of the Imperial Palace shuddered. The siege had begun. And now the wind had changed. Jaghatai Khan, the rider of stars, the master of open roads, drew his blade not for hunting, but for home. He turned to his brotherhoods, their armor cracked and blackened, their scars fresh, their eyes bright. And he said only this, "Now we ride." Then engines screamed, and the storm came to Terra. The first time Jaghatai Khan set foot on Terra, since the days of the Great Crusade, the skies were burning. Clouds of black smoke coiled above the horizon, thick as volcanic ash, choking the light of the sun. The air reeked of ozone and blood. War had come to the throne world not as a storm, but as a funeral pyre, set alight by the hands of those once called brothers. The palace was no longer the heart of the Imperium. It was a wound. Jagged walls of adamantium and stonecrete stretched for kilometers, festooned with cannon turrets, void shields, and ancient banners scorched by artillery fire. Atop the hollow mountain, the heavens had been reshaped by orbital bombardment. Chasms yawned open where mountains once stood. Bastions once considered unbreakable now trembled beneath the siege of the traitor legions. The white scars did not arrive with pageantry. They landed at the Lion's Gate spaceport amid a rain of shrapnel and screaming artillery, their drop craft torn open by macro battery fire, their escorts trailing smoke. But land they did, in perfect formation, engines shrieking like falcons descending from a storm front. The Khagan stepped from the prow of the Sword Storm in full war plate, his cloak snapping in the wind, his face masked behind the snarling visage of a steppe lion. No salutes, no words, only war. Rogel Dorn greeted him at the gates of the Eternity Wall Bastion. The Lord of the Seventh stood among shattered columns, his golden armor dented and dust-covered, his blade sheathed but not forgotten. Dorn did not embrace his brother. He did not smile. He did not bow. He simply looked at Jaghatai and said, "You are late," to which the Khagan replied, "You are still alive." It was the closest either would come to affection. They spoke for mere minutes. Alone beneath a torn marble arch, now blackened by fire. Dorn spoke of walls, of breach points, of lost outworks and advancing traitors. He spoke of Perturabo's grinding siegecraft and Mortrion's creeping filth, of demons leaking through cracks in reality. Jaghatai said little. He merely asked, "Where is the fighting heaviest?" Dorn answered, "The Saturnine line. The Helios Bastion." The Lion's Gate. The Khagan turned to his Stormseers, his captains, and his Keshig. He pointed toward the Lion's Gate. "We hold that, or we die." The Lion's Gate spaceport was the key. The high orbital docks there still had partial control over the Void Shield lattice. If it fell completely, Terra's sky would become naked to Horus's warships. Even with the Phalanx in high orbit, the traitor fleets pressed relentlessly from every vector: Black Legion, Iron Warriors, Word-bearers, and worse. And at the gate they came with fury. The ruins of the spaceport stretched across 20 kilometers of shattered ground and crater-pocked landing decks. The last of the Imperial fists had dug in beneath the landing towers, reduced to company strength after weeks of holding against waves of berserkers and plague-born alike. Blood stained every surface. Munitions ran low. Vox networks crackled with static. Then came the howl. The White Scars charged into the fray not with drills or shield formations, but with speed. Jet bikes roared down the shattered runways like lightning on legs of fire. Land speeders skimmed low over the blood-slick ground, their multi-meltas flashing like stars against the incoming tides. The sons of Chogoris hit like a thunderclap, silent, swift, final. Khans of the Third and Fifth Brotherhoods led flanking charges that split the enemy's advance in half, carving through the World Eater's berserk lines before the traitors could even register their presence. Chain axes meant for smashing walls swung uselessly at air as the scars danced past, cutting throats with crescent-bladed tulwars. But it wasn't just speed, it was precision. Every movement was a poem, every kill a stanza. Jaghatai himself rode into battle on the back of Sky Spear, a jet bike of ancient make, its engines modified with archaeotech gleaned from lost Chogorian science. His blade, White Fang, gleamed in the firelight, its arc trailing vaporized blood. He rode directly into the ranks of traitor Astartes, not flanking, not retreating. A straight charge, a statement. Behind him, the Keshig followed, his personal guard, elite beyond measure. They fought not as individuals but as a storm, circling, slicing, vanishing, and reappearing like ghost wind. Jaghatai struck down a hellbrute with a single pass, cleaving through ceramite and mutated flesh in one fluid sweep. Then he leapt from his bike mid-motion and landed on a rampart overrun by word-bearers. His tulwar blurred. He moved through them like smoke through reeds. When the Keshig caught up, only corpses remained. But the enemy was endless. For every traitor killed, 2 more emerged from the blasted plains. A tide of cultists, Daemon Keen, and corrupted machines surged forward. Plague engines groaned beneath rusted armor. Raptors screamed down from the clouds like carrion hawks. Sorcerers tore open holes in the sky, letting nightmares spill through. Yasuge was gone. But the storm seers still rode. One, Batar Tenjin, stood atop the Lion's Gate control tower, chanting in Chogorian as flames spiraled around him. He raised both hands and called the storm. Warp energy crackled, twisted, and snapped, not as a curse, but as clarity. Lightning struck the traitor lines with surgical violence. Where the enemy twisted the warp into horror, the scars rode it with purpose. The storm was not their enemy. It was their horse. The traitors faltered. For the first time in days, the advance stalled. The Lion's Gate did not fall. It howled. And above it all, the Khagan stood, cloak torn, armor burning, his blade slick with black blood. He had not spoken in hours, not even to his brothers. His silence was louder than any war cry. Night fell, a slow, burning dusk. The fighting did not stop, but the momentum had shifted. Dawn contacted the white scars through Private Vox. His voice was gravel, hoarse from days of command. You held the gate. The Khagan's response was clipped. I said we would. That was all. Later, after the battlefield had quieted and the fires had dimmed, Jaghatai Khan walked alone through the ruined towers of the Lion's Gate. Corpses surrounded him, traitors, loyalists, even civilians caught in the crossfire. He stopped before a shattered statue of the Emperor, broken at the knees, its head fallen, buried beneath rubble. He stared at it. Then slowly he unsheathed his blade and carved a single glyph into the stone. Chogorian. It meant ride. Then he turned and vanished into the dark. Because Terra was not saved. It was merely surviving. And the storm had only just begun. The storm did not break over Terra. It stayed, coiled like a dragon above the hollow mountain, constant, seething, alive. The sky remained the color of bruised steel, lit by the flash of macro battery fire and the sick glow of demonic auroras pulsing through the thin atmosphere. Every hour another outpost fell. Every hour another wall screamed. The war had grown teeth, and Terra was bleeding. But within that endless siege, the white scars rode, not like the fists who dug in, not like the custodes who stood like statues of gold. The scars moved through the battle like thunderheads on an open plain, never pausing, never still. While others held, they hunted, and the Khagan's eyes were already on something deeper. Not the walls, the veins. The Imperial Palace was more than a fortress. Beneath its towers and bastions lay a labyrinth of tunnels, data nodes, power routes, and arteria transit lines, arteries that pulsed with the lifeblood of the Imperium. Most were forgotten, some were forbidden, all were vulnerable, and now they were under siege. Perturabo's forces had begun their own form of invasion, not from above, but below. Siege drills, excavation claws, and demon-possessed tunneling machines scraping at the underbelly of Terra like worms seeking marrow. The Iron Warriors did not care for banners or glory. They dug. They undermined. They collapsed walls with mathematics and hate. The Saturnine tunnels had already fallen. The gene labs beneath the broken stair were lost. Now the pressure shifted toward the Ebon Arteria, the primary power transfer route feeding the Lion's Gate bastion and the orbital defense grid. It was shielded, buried under kilometers of bedrock, fortified in ages past by the Mechanicum. But Perturabo had found a way in, and Jaghatai Khan was going to strike him back. The operation was not sanctioned. Dorn would not have approved. The fists believed in solid lines, anchor points, visible strength. But the Khagan knew how to kill better than Dorn understood how to move. He had read the pulse of this war, felt it in the tremors of every collapsed vault and every tremble beneath the landing zones. They weren't going to win this siege by waiting. They had to ride into the machine. The attack began before dawn, if dawn could still be counted beneath a sky choked by fire and dust. The assault force was small, no more than 400 scars drawn from the 1st, 5th, and 10th Brotherhoods. Every rider chosen, every weapon tuned, no heavy armor, no support batteries, just bikes, blades, and will. They launched from the ashen vaults near the base of the Calastus Wall, an entrance once sealed by vault code and now broken open by Magos Khans loyal to the Legion. The Scars rode into the dark on grav bikes and storm cycles, their engines whispering death through the corridors of ancient stone and alloy. It was not a road, it was a vein, and they would bleed it dry. The tunnels were warped, not by nature, by intent. The Iron Warriors had not only breached the arteria, they had remade it. Walls of ferrocrete had been lined with sigils of attrition and order, carved not by hand but by madness. Machine spirits choked on scrap code. Navigation beacons screamed false coordinates. The tunnels breathed wrong. And the Scars did not slow. Jaghatai led the charge, his blade bared, his eyes narrowed to slits beneath his helm. Each corner brought ambushes, turrets, booby traps, shrieking demon automata that burst from the walls in arcs of molten circuitry. The White Scars did not halt. They cut. Chinsar led the vanguard through the lower culverts, his Keshig striking with the precision of wind against grain. 2 of his riders died to warp glass mines. He did not look back. Bartar, Stormseer of the 5th Brotherhood, countered the scrap code with his mind, focusing the storm into a wall of psychic pressure that cracked enemy logic like brittle glass. They reached the enemy staging grounds within 3 hours. It was not a base. It was a temple, built from the bones of servitors and sealed behind a gate of inverted machine liturgy. The Iron Warriors had constructed a command nexus in the heart of the arteria, beneath the palace's lifeline, a place to coordinate, to dissect, to destroy. Jaghatai looked at it and saw a mistake. They had made something solid, and he was born to break it. The attack was not a siege, it was an eruption. The Scars hit the outpost in 3 flanks, not to encircle but to pierce. Their warbikes shrieked through corridors too narrow for tanks, every rider armed with melta charges and twin-linked bolt carbines. The Iron Warriors responded as they always did, by calculating, bracing, reinforcing. That was their flaw. The Scars did not stay. They slid between kill zones, burst through bastions with zero hesitation. 1 squad dismounted mid-charge, scaled a vertical shaft with climbing talons, and dropped frag charges directly into the command corps' air intake. It was not war. It was surgery. Jaghatai reached the central sanctum alone. The Iron Warriors' commander, a warsmith named Baram Lorn, stood atop a control spire surrounded by grav tethers and rune tables. He turned, snarling through his rebreather, aiming a volkite maul the size of a thunderhawk wing. "You're too late," Lorn said. "The collapse has already begun. The Ebon artery is dying." The Kagan said nothing. He ran. The distance between them vanished in a heartbeat. White Fang flashed. Lorn blocked. Barely. The floor cracked. They fought atop the control nexus like twin storms, one of precision, the other of inevitability. Lorn struck with gravity pulses, hammering the platform. Jaghatai countered with speed, each strike a flicker of light. He was not faster. He was inevitable. When the blade finally struck Lorn's throat, there was no cry, only a sigh. Then silence. The White Scars set charges. They did not occupy the nexus. They did not need it. They detonated it from within. As the tunnel shook and the arteria shuddered, Batar sent a final burst of calm across the Vox. The road is cleared, the blood flows again, and the white scars rode out through fire. Dorn never spoke of the strike, but the breaches in the palace's veins stopped widening. The Lion's Gate held, and from that day the enemy began to hesitate, because they knew. The storm did not sit on Terra's walls. It moved, and it was hunting. The thunder of war echoed through the Imperial Palace without end. In the east, the Saturnine lines strained under the Iron Warriors' relentless pressure. To the south, Death Guard siege crawlers advanced inch by inch through poison-soaked trenches. Above, fire rained from the skies as orbital battlefields spilled their slaughter into the clouds. And within the hollow mountain itself, a quieter war raged, one not fought with bolters or blades, but with silence, deception, and speed. The White Scars did not fight only with fury. They fought with knowledge, and now the Khagan needed it more than ever. The Emperor had not spoken since the siege began, not to the generals, not to Dorn, not even to Malcador, who now walked like a man burdened by centuries instead of years. The Master of Mankind remained upon the golden throne, his presence felt but unseen, his will silent. The fate of the Imperium, of humanity itself, rested in hands that could no longer be held. Dorn made plans, Sanguinius bled. Malcador schemed, but it was Jaghatai Khan who listened. He did not ask the gods for visions. He asked the wind. And the wind whispered of things lost. It was a storm seer named Chogorian Tenba who brought the warning. He had returned from the shard cells, deep beneath the sigilite's vaults, his hair white, his breath unsteady, his aura fraying with warp burn. He had not spoken in days, but when he emerged before the Khagan, kneeling among the ash-flecked petals of the Keshig's shrine chamber, he uttered only 5 words. "They are stealing the keys." Jaghatai looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. The hunt began. The Pale Couriers were never supposed to exist. They were operatives once assigned to the Geno 5-2 Chiliad, an ancient Terran regiment of stealth and counter-espionage warriors. They had been disbanded during the Unification Wars, but their methods had not been forgotten. When the heresy erupted, and Terra faced not just a siege but a subversion, the remnants of their traditions had reawakened, recruited, repurposed, and warped. Now they served the War Master, not as warriors, but as thieves. Their target, the Index Apotheos, an encrypted series of vaults buried beneath the Hall of Leng, a forgotten chamber at the palace's outer edge, once a place of diplomacy, now nothing more than a ruin. The Index contained no weapons, not troops, names of psychers hidden across the Imperium, names of lost gene lines, names of ancient protocols, names that could unlock sealed gates, activate fail-safes, reveal the coordinates of secret bastions meant to outlast even Terra's fall. If those names reached Horus, it wouldn't matter if the walls held. The future would belong to the traitors. The White Scars were not made for surveillance, but they were made for movement. Jaghatai dispatched a select force, less than 100 warriors, led by Shiban Khan and Batar Tenjin. They did not ride openly. They moved through the bloodlines of Terra's walls, collapsed stairwells, forgotten service ducts, maintenance shafts haunted by ancient machine spirits. They did not wear their heraldry. They bore no sigils, only pale armor and the glyphs of no clan. They became ghosts, and in doing so they found the ones who had tried to ghost through first. The Pale Couriers were already inside. They moved like phantoms, wrapped in skin shrouds of light-dampening polymers, their hearts replaced with synth chambers to fool auspex. They had no names, only numbers. They spoke only in chemical code, leaving behind scent trails instead of vox. But they had made one mistake. They underestimated the riders of the storm. In the vaults of the Hall of Leng, beneath fractured columns and marble dust, the scars made contact. It wasn't a battle. It was a hunt. Shaban's squad, mounted not on jet bikes but on grav skimmers designed for interior flight, moved through the ruins like wind through bone. Every echo was a clue, every displaced speck of dust, a trail. They tracked the couriers by the absence of presence, and when they found them, they struck. The battle lasted 17 seconds. Not a single shot was fired, blades only. The scars cut the pale couriers down before they could scream, but not before one of them activated a silent distress pulse. The vault door began to open. The door was not mechanical. It was living. A biomechanical interface, a forgotten fusion of pre-imperial design and techno-arcana. It unfolded like a flower, red tendrils reaching toward the data rack within. Batar moved forward, his mind stretching through the currents of unreality, trying to seal it with force of will. He failed. From the other side of the vault, a shadow moved. The last of the pale couriers had survived. He was different. Taller, older, not human in the strictest sense. His face was a surgical mask of scarified flesh. His hands ended in neural jacks, not fingers. He did not speak. He did not flee. He finished the command sequence. Jaghatai Khan arrived one breath too late, but he was there. White fang cleaved through the courier mid-sentence, splitting him in two even as the vault opened behind him. The damage was done, but not complete. Batar stepped into the vault, pulled the command core free and crushed it with both hands. Psychic fire danced across his robes. His mouth bled. But the names did not leave the palace. They died in fire and silence. Later, in the high towers of the inner sanctum, Dawn faced Jaghatai across a table of stone. The Lord of the Seventh was not a man who offered praise freely, but he offered it now. "You saved more than lives today," he said. "You saved what might come after." Jaghatai did not smile. He only said, "There is no after if we forget the now." He turned, cloak whipping behind him, and walked away. That night the scars gathered in a narrow shrine on the western wall, a place not marked on the maps. There was no fire, no feast, just silence. And one by one they recited the names of the dead, not those who died today, but those whose names they had saved, warriors unborn, souls yet to be forged. The future remembered in the fire of the present. The storm had carried secrets, and for once it kept them, because that too was part of the ride. The beating heart of Terra had once been quiet. In ages past, when the Imperium was young and unbloodied, the inner sanctums of the palace were places of stillness, contemplation, and design. The Emperor had walked those halls with builders, scribes, dreamers. The colonnades had echoed with discourse, not death. But those times were ash now. Now, beneath the hollow mountain, the sanctum had become a labyrinth of war, a twisting, ever-evolving maze of ferocrete and madness, reshaped by siege and time, gnawed at from within by traitors, and without by the press of eternity. And Jaghatai Khan stood before its mouth. Dawn had called it the Gate of Echoes, though it bore no official designation. It was a long-forgotten junction beneath the meridional bastion, a tangling of maintenance halls, transit passages, and collapsed subvaults that once served the flow of personnel and materiel between inner palace zones. When the traitors began their infiltration campaigns, Dawn had ordered the junction sealed, deeming it unstable, indefensible, irrelevant. But Jaghatai had learned to trust instability. It moved like a current. It showed its shape only to those who rode with it. And now his storm-seers had confirmed what the Sigillite feared. A force of word-bearers, alongside warp-twisted auxiliaries and demon-spawned infiltration units, had breached the Gate of Echoes through collapsed catacombs below the salt furnace ranges. They weren't charging the walls. They were inside them. Jaghatai did not wait for approval. He called his Keshig, his personal guard, along with 2 full brotherhoods, riders who had survived Kondax, Prospero, and the Ibon Arteria. He gave no speeches, no declarations, only a single order. Bring blades, bring speed, no banners. And they rode, not above the ground, not through the palace spires, but down, into the earth, into the bones of the throne world. The Gate of Echoes lived up to its name. The deeper they descended, the more the air thickened, not with pressure, but with memory. Footsteps reverberated for too long. Voices whispered even when no one spoke. The walls changed direction when unwatched. Some passageways circled back. Others seemed to lead forward, but deposited the riders where they began. It was not the warp. It was worse, deliberate. This was no natural maze. It had been reshaped from within. As the scars moved through the dark, their engines humming low, the vox lines flared with static. And then a voice, not a transmission, not machine noise. A voice. Brother, the sound of Horus, not spoken, breathed. The Stormseers redoubled their wards. They chanted Chogorian protection rites, scrawled storm glyphs on the walls with blood-mixed ash, and carved binding lines into the floor with ritual blades. But the deeper they rode, the more alive the labyrinth became. Walls bled, floors pulsed, and from the dark came the traitors. It began with the shriek of scrap chain blades, echoing through the tunnels like tortured laughter. The word-bearers emerged from collapsed prayer ducts and blackened archways, red armor gleaming with glyphs of blasphemy, their mouths split open in ritual scars, tongues removed and replaced with rune metal. They didn't roar. They sang. Warp psalms rippled through the air, each syllable laced with forbidden harmonics that cracked stone and shattered the mind. White Scars riders staggered, some tumbling from their bikes. One Stormseer convulsed mid-chant, his skull imploding in a flash of lightless fire. But the Scars responded not with fear, but with speed. Jaghatai rode ahead of the Keshig, weaving between pillars of broken marble and shattered plinths, his blade-white fang a blur of curved silver. He did not strike wildly. Each cut was purposeful, each target chosen. A word-bearer sorcerer raised a staff of bone and warp glass, and lost his head before the incantation finished. The tunnels were too narrow for true charges, but the Scars made them work. Bikes skimmed low, defying gravity, engines whining in tight coils of speed and smoke. Melta-bombs were flung with perfect accuracy. Grenades detonated in mid-turn. Tulwars flashed under red light. Chinsa led the center force, his helm removed, hair bound in a war braid, blood flecking his cheeks as he rode down a possessed Gal Vorbak, dragging it behind his bike until its spine tore free. "Cut the song," he snarled. "Cut their voices." The Stormseers obeyed. One by one they located the chant leaders. Each kill muted part of the labyrinth's echo. The traitors screamed, the warp song faltered, the tunnels shuddered, and then silence, the kind that came not with peace, but with bated breath. It wasn't over. Beneath the Gate of Echoes, deeper than even the Stormseers had guessed, lay the heart of the infiltration, a shrine forge built from the corpses of fallen custodies and stone that bled when touched. A central core of hate, a place not built for worship, but for birth. A demon engine, half-formed, was being summoned there, its body a grotesque fusion of techno-sorcery and captive machine spirits. The word-bearers had dragged the souls of murdered psychers from the surface into its coils, feeding it with agony and doctrine. If completed, it would tear a hole into the webway beneath Terra. And Jaghatai had no time left. There was no strategy now, only storm. The Kagan gave no order. He rode. The Keshig followed without words. Riders became blades. Engines screamed like the wind. The final charge into the Forge Shrine was madness, walls spitting fire, warp lightning crawling across the ceiling, demons wailing in chains that wanted to break. Scars burst through the outer cordon in perfect synchronization, melta charges burning glyph-bound thresholds. Batar Tenjin split his own hand open and cast a flame of psychic wrath, so hot it seared the unseared. Jaghatai leapt from Sky Spear mid-turn, landed on the deck of the half-formed engine, and drove his blade into its heart. It screamed, not mechanically, personally, as if it knew him, and then it began to die. The resulting blast leveled the core chamber. Stone melted. Metal wept. The tunnel buckled, entire arteries of the labyrinth collapsing behind the retreating scars. The riders did not look back. They never did. When they emerged from the depths, days later, carrying their wounded, the Gate of Echoes had sealed behind them, collapsed in fire and dust. Dorn was waiting. For once he said nothing. He only nodded. Jaghatai did not respond. He looked eastward, toward the heart of the hollow mountain, toward the place where his brother Horus now watched. He whispered one word. Soon, and the storm rode on. There are many kinds of silence. There is the silence before battle, the breath held, the blade poised. There is the silence of loss, when the wind forgets how to howl. And then there is the silence of purpose, when every thought, every motion, every life is drawn into a single, final act. That was the silence that filled the hall of the Moondial. It was a chamber old before the founding of the Imperium, a place of star maps and ancient philosophy, once used by the Emperor himself to contemplate the movements of stars long since devoured. Now it served a different purpose. It was where Jaghatai Khan summoned the Kizagan. The Kizagan were not a brotherhood, they were not a company, not a formation, not something one could find on a chart or a roster. They were a promise, an oath written in blood and kept in silence. In the traditions of Chogoris, the Kaizagan were those who volunteered for no return, riders who did not ask to survive, but only to ride the final perfect hunt. Their names were removed from the rolls. Their deeds were not recorded in the saga halls. Their armor bore no glyphs, no clan markings, no honors, only red, only speed. The traitors had breached the Colossi foundries. It was a sprawling manufactorum complex once dedicated to the production of macro-weaponry and void shield capacitors. Now it was a crater of ash occupied by the Iron Warriors and their war factories. They used it as a forward position for the siege of the Eternity Wall, constructing siege towers from the bones of the city, rolling plague chariots into position like clockwork abominations. From the depths of the foundries, a new engine of war was rising, a necrothurgic cataclysm array, powered by cursed plasma and warp reactors stitched into the minds of tormented psychers. If it reached the outer ring, the Eternity Wall would fall. Dorn knew it. The Sigillite knew it. But there was no way through. The approach was suicide, covered by quad-heavy gun towers, interdiction fields, sensor nets, and above all, traitor artillery, timed to blanket the approach with mathematically perfected hell. It was not a fortress, it was a trap for hope. But the Khagan was never afraid of traps. He simply rode faster than they could close. In the hall of the Moondial, Jaghatai Khan stood alone at the edge of the star-map dais. The constellations flickered overhead, remnants of a sky long lost to the fires of war. He looked to his warriors, not his brotherhoods, not his lieutenants, just the volunteers. They had already gathered. No speeches were given, no blessings offered. Just a nod, and the door opened. The death ride of the Kizagan began at dusk. From the southern hangar of the White Tower they rode, 197 riders, all in storm-worn white, with crimson stripes across their helms and no identifiers. Their bikes were tuned beyond standard tolerances, engines stripped to nothing but acceleration and burn. No long-range weapons, no heavy armor, just speed, just death. They passed through the shattered gate of sighs like lightning through rain. The wind howled, not for them, but with them. The Iron Warriors registered the incursion immediately. Data spikes flared across their Auspex arrays. Killbox calculations began. Artillery was primed. The sensor-laced towers of the Colossi foundries swiveled to face the white streaks, cutting across the scorched fields. Too late. The Kizagan were already inside the storm. The first wave hit the perimeter gun emplacements with Melta bombs, dropping charges directly under the Ferrocrete shielding, and diving into the resulting fireballs to carry the blast forward. By the time the traitors responded, the second wave had already pierced the outer trench line, cutting through servitor gunners and demon-bound automata with blades lit like fireflies under a dying sun. They did not fight to hold ground. They fought to puncture. Jaghatai rode at the head. He was not faster than the rest. He was the pace. His blade gleamed in one hand. The other gripped the handlebars of Sky Spear. He said nothing, but the sky itself followed him, clouds boiling in his wake. Around him, the world became a blur of flame and ruin. He saw an Iron Warrior's tank battery just ahead. 3 predators chained together with spiked armor plating, their barrels already pivoting. He rode between them. White fang flashed. The barrels fell away. Then the tanks exploded. Beneath the foundries, the core reactors were housed inside a subterranean vault, guarded by corrupted tech priests and warpsmiths who had grafted their minds to cogitator frames of flesh and brass. They chanted binary hexes, their limbs bristling with flame projectors and scrap blades. The Kizaghan entered the vault on foot. They moved like ghosts of old thunder, slicing through defenders in a storm of curved blades and twin-linked bolt pistols. They struck before the warpsmiths could utter the last syllable of their incantations. The Stormseers, there were only 2, spoke in wind and memory, unbinding the warp seals with verses that cracked the machine spirit of the reactor core wide open. And then they lit the sun. The blast could be seen from the spires of the Eternity Wall. A white column of plasma roared into the sky, capped with black flame and a scream that sent flocks of shrikebirds plummeting from the heavens. The necrothurgic array never deployed. The foundries were gone. And with them, the Kizagan. Every last one. Not a name was recorded, not a body recovered. The storm had taken them, and the traitors would never forget. Later, on the broken steps of the Eternity Wall, Rogel Dawn approached Jaghatai Khan. He looked at the wreckage on the horizon. He looked at the blood-smeared armor of the Legion of the Fifth. Then he looked at the Khan. "You spent your best." Jaghatai did not look at him. He simply said, "I did not spend them." He paused. "I set them free." That night in the White Tower, the surviving scars painted a single red line across the walls of the sanctum. Not a symbol, not a shrine, just a line. Fast, final, flawless. The wind passed through the halls without sound. The storm rode on. The storm outside had broken. Not in peace, but in choice. It was the 34th day of the Siege of Terra. The palace groaned under the weight of the traitors' fury. The defenses of the Eternity Wall had held, just barely, but it was no longer a matter of if the walls would break. It was when. The ring was closing. The palace was bleeding. And so was Jaghatai Khan. Not in body, in purpose. For days now he had felt it, gnawing at the edge of every strike, lingering behind every order. That this was not the end. That his path did not stop here. That Terra was not the limit of his storm. The White Scars had done the impossible. They had held the Lion's Gate. They had shattered the traitors beneath the palace. They had outmaneuvered the War Master's traps. But none of it mattered if Horus reached the throne, and now the paths were narrowing. The time for speed was over. The time for the blade had come. The summons came not from a man. It came from a door. Hidden in the deepest halls of the inner sanctum, below even the Sanctus Mechanius, where the air still bore the copper tang of the Emperor's touch, there was a vault without name. It bore no sigil, no lock, no guards, only a wind. When Jaghatai Khan passed by it on the way to an emergency war council with the sigillite, it opened without a word. Inside was darkness. He entered alone. The chamber was smaller than he expected. No great throne, no high machinery. Only a single pedestal on which sat a sword. Curved, ancient. Its blade was dull, its hilt wrapped in faded hide. It looked less like a relic and more like a memory. But when Jaghatai touched it, the wind screamed. He saw not visions but possibility. 1,000 paths, 1,000,000 deaths, the fall of the palace, the rise of chaos. Terra lost, Terra broken, the Imperium scattered to the void, the Emperor bound to his throne, blind and burning, Gilliman broken, Dawn slain, Sanguinius gone, and himself either gone or changed. The voice came not from the sword, but from the storm. You were made to ride the edge, to choose the moment. This is it. He looked down at the blade. He took it. He turned, and the vault sealed behind him. The council with Malkador was brief. The sigillite saw the blade at Jaghatai's side and said only, "So, you found it." Jaghatai's reply was a whisper. "It found me. What do you intend to do?" "What I always have," said the Kigan. "Cut the road." And with that, he left. Malkador watched him go, then turned to the shadows behind him and said, "He will be the pivot." From the dark, a voice replied, "He was always the storm's sharpest edge." That night, the traitors made their push. The Iron Warriors, their numbers still swollen from earlier gains, launched a two-pronged assault on the Helios Bastion and the Adamant Coil, aiming to sever the palace's eastern inner wall. The Word-Bearers unleashed warp storms along the western sky bridge. The Sons of Horus themselves pushed toward the Lion's Gate once more. The defenders reeled, the line nearly snapped, and then, the white scars vanished. Dawn's aides screamed for answers. Vox beacons failed. Sensor arrays could not locate them. Not a single rider responded. It wasn't until the traitors pushed into the breach at the Helios Bastion that they saw it. White lightning. The scars came down the mountainside, not through the gates, not through the bastions, but down sheer cliffs, through smoke and gunfire, howling like falcons and carving through the enemy's rear with such ferocity that entire warbands turned and fled before making contact. It was not a relief charge. It was a reaper's ride. Jaghatai Khan led the charge in silence. The blade he carried was not White Fang. It was the sword from the vault, and as he rode, it changed. It shimmered, not in light, but identity. Sometimes curved, sometimes straight, sometimes golden, sometimes bone, sometimes screaming, and every time it struck, it took, not life, not blood, but fate. The enemy broke. The Word-Bearers, who had mocked the Kogan as a silent brute, fled screaming from his approach, their warp wards unraveling as he cut through them like cloth. The Iron Warriors, so certain in their math and steel, failed to account for a storm with no pattern. The Sons of Horus did not even reach the walls. They were already running. Dawn finally made contact with the Kogan via Private Vox. "You turned the tide." Jaghatai said nothing. Dawn tried again. "Where did you go?" This time the Kogan answered. His voice was calm. "I went where you could not." By dawn, the traitor advance had collapsed. The breaches were sealed, the gates reinforced, the guns reloaded. But something else had changed. Across the palace, soldiers whispered of a sword that could not be seen, of a storm that walked like a man, of a silence that killed without mercy. And in the highest tower of the imperial palace, Malkador sat before the golden throne and said, "He's made his choice." The emperor did not speak, but the flame behind his eyes burned brighter. That night the Khagan returned to the White Tower. His Keshig gathered around him. None spoke. He placed the blade on a black silk cloth and looked to them. "All paths end here," he said, "but not ours." He turned to the window. The stars were dimming. The war was not won, but the wind had shifted, and it carried his name. Beneath the Palace of Terra, under 10,000 meters of adamantium and memory, lies a road carved before memory began. It is not listed on any star map. It does not appear in the Librarius's charts. The Mechanicum call it non-existent. The Administratum calls it closed. The White Scars call it home. They name it the Tenger Kotol, the Wind Plain, a hollowed artery of black stone and dusted ash, wide enough to ride 3 bikes abreast at full charge, long enough to forget where the sky begins. It was once a transportation conduit for the Emperor's lightning wars in the earliest days of unification, then forgotten, buried. But Jaghatai Khan never forgot roads. He found them, even when they didn't wish to be found. The storm had stilled on the surface. Terra's upper bastions had gone quiet for a breath, the kind of quiet that makes the blood slow and the heart wait. Dorn called it a moment of false mercy. Malkador, watching the stars, knew otherwise. This was not peace. It was the drawing of a blade. The White Scars had gone underground, and something followed. They did not descend as an army. Only 9. The Keshig, Jagatai's finest, now stripped down to the core. Chinsha, Batar, Ganbold, several others who bore no names anymore, only scars and glyphs burnt into their flesh from ancient rites. The Khan led them on foot. No engines, no bikes, no fanfare, just blades and silence, because this path was not war, it was justice. The intelligence came from a black sentinel, half mad from warp exposure, who had stumbled into a White Scars checkpoint near the southern Eclipticon wall. He babbled for hours before speaking a single clear phrase. Abaddon has broken beneath. He seeks the gene vaults, the old vaults, the buried vaults, the forgotten ones. Dorn dismissed it. Malkador went white, and Jaghatai left the room. The moment the door shut, the Sigillite looked to Dorn and said, "If they reach the vaults beneath the mountain, there is no future." "What lies there?" Dorn asked. Malkador's eyes narrowed. Hope. Abaddon the Despoiler had not come to Terra to simply break its walls. That was Perturabo's obsession. Abaddon wanted something deeper. The gene vaults of the inner sanctum, sealed since the days of the Thunder Warriors, home to unstable, rejected genelines, the roots of the Astartes project, the Emperor's failures, his secrets. In the hands of a genius, they would mean little. In the hands of the War Master's chosen, they would mean everything. And Abaddon was already there, with his just iron, with his sorcerers, with his blades. The wind plane roared with memory. As the Keshig stepped into its depth, every breath felt like it carried the weight of another age. Each stride echoed. The dust clung to their boots as if unwilling to let them pass. Then they saw them, the sons of Horus, not cultists, not lesser marines twisted by time, the black-armored elite, the first murderers, and at their head, Abaddon. His armor was thicker now, darkened by the warp, his expression colder, his eyes gleaming with fury older than the heresy itself. In one hand he held the talon of Horus, in the other a demonic blade that twitched like it wanted to breathe. The moment their eyes met, neither spoke. They simply charged. The wind plane became a fury of movement. The Keshig clashed with the Justaerin in a storm of silver and black. There were no war cries, only impact, blade against blade, pulse against pulse. Sparks filled the corridor like fireflies in a furnace. The air choked with the smell of burning ceramite and flesh. Baatar met a warp-seared sorcerer mid-duel and incinerated him with a psychic scream that shattered 3 helmets nearby. Ganbol drove his blade into the throat of a Justaerin twice his size, losing an arm in the process. Chinsa struck down 2, 3, 5. His tulwar a blur, his shoulder broken, his knee bleeding. He did not stop. But they were not the focus. This was a duel of storms. Jaghatai and Abaddon met in the dead center of the tunnel. And the world stopped. The talons struck first. Jaghatai sidestepped, letting the claws scrape sparks from the wall. His counterattack came in an arc, blinding, sharp, pure. His blade sang as it struck Abaddon's shoulder plate, drawing black blood but not halting the traitor's advance. The Kagan moved like wind, Abaddon like stone. Each strike was a story, each dodge a memory. They were more than men. They were ideologies, clashing in a place older than either of them had ever walked. Abaddon roared, "Your father's throne is already cold," Jaghatai replied with steel. "You mistake stillness for death." The duel stretched through time, neither yielded, neither tired. But the Khan began to change, not his flesh, not his armor, his motion. He became faster, not in step, but in intention. His attacks weren't random, they were deliberate, measured. Abaddon grew angrier. Fight like a man. But Jaghatai was not a man. He was the rider, the hunter. And Abaddon? He had made himself the prey. The final blow was not thunderous, it was precise. Jaghatai let Abaddon strike, allowed the talon to pass within a hair's breadth of his jaw. Then he spun, twisting into the despoiler's blind side and driving the blade not into his chest, but into the wrist. The demonic blade dropped. Jaghatai kicked it away, sending it spinning into the dark. Then he placed the tip of his sword at Abaddon's throat. The air froze. The Keshig watched. So did the survivors of the Justaerin. Abaddon bled, then grinned. "Do it," he hissed. "Kill me and become like him." The Kagan's voice was a whisper. "No." And he stepped back. "You don't deserve my blade." Then he turned and walked away. The surviving traitors did not pursue. They knew better. The Keshig followed, bloodied but victorious, and the gene vaults remained sealed. Later, atop the western battlements, Dorn met him again. "You should have ended him." Jaghatai only looked at the horizon. "I did." Dorn scowled. "He lives." "Only for now," the Kagan said, and in his hand the sword flickered, like a storm caught in a mirror. That night the scars sang, not of victory, but of balance, of roads not taken, of deaths not given, and the wind listened and was still. The walls of the imperial palace wept stone. Every bastion groaned under the weight of the traitor's wrath. The Saturnine gate had cracked. The Helios bastion stood scorched and haunted. The Palace of Terra, once the most impregnable fortress in the history of mankind, now bled light, blood, and ghosts from every wound. And in that hollow hour before dawn, the air was still, too still, not the stillness of peace, the stillness of breath held before the world breaks. It was in this breath that Jaghatai Khan stood alone upon the pinnacle of the White Tower, his silhouette carved against a sky choked in fire. He could see it all, the broken spires of the eastern defenses, the smoking sky of the ecliptic bastion, the distant glow of the ruined moon. His legion was dying, not in battle, but in completion. The white scars had not held ground. They had paved it. Their speed had mapped the siege. Their blades had split the pressure points. They had cut through the worst of it, again and again, not to survive, but to buy seconds for those who must. Now those seconds were spent, and the final moment had arrived. Word came from Malkador, carried by one of his silent agents. The outermost perimeter around the Lion's Gate was on the verge of collapse. Traitor Titans were pushing through the final avenue of resistance. A corrupted warmonger-class engine had breached the southern plains, accompanied by warbands of Sons of Horus and traitor custodies. One more push, and the inner spires would be within sight of the enemy's artillery. Dorne had no troops left to spare. Sanguinius was too far north, entombed in blood and fury atop the Eternity Wall. The Golden Throne remained untouched, but only because its doom had not yet seen it. So the Khagan stood, and he chose. He did not call his brotherhoods. He did not ask for volunteers. He did not explain. He only left a message, burned into the stone floor of the White Tower with the edge of his blade. I ride to buy the sky. And then he was gone. They saw him first as a blur across the horizon, just a single rider cutting through the remains of the Eclipsion front like a meteor given form. Skyspear screamed beneath him, its engines enhanced beyond any known tolerances. No escort, no vox, no signal flares. Jaghatai Khan rode alone, but the storm rode with him. He crossed the ridge where the 7th Bastion once stood, passed through the ash remains of the Magyar Mazan, and rode into the maw of the final assault. There were thousands, Death Guard tanks leaking rot and oil, Iron Warriors, siege crawlers carving trenches as they advanced, word-bearers chanting through vox horns embedded in their flesh. And walking at the center, wrapped in a shell of brass and hate, was the corrupted titan known only as Pavor Ultima, a warmonger-class behemoth, festooned with shrines to the ruinous powers, its void shields powered by the souls of its original crew. And into that mass the Khagan charged. No one understands speed like a scar, but no one ever understood Jaghatai. He moved not just fast, he moved with perfect fury. Every strike was a defiance of inevitability. Every turn a dance with death. He used the very battlefield as his weapon, luring tanks into crossfire, causing siege guns to overshoot into friendly lines, bringing dust clouds up behind him that blinded sensor arrays for entire formations. And then he reached the Titan, and he disappeared beneath it. No one saw what happened inside Pavor Ultima, not the scars who came after, not the Mechanicum, not even the traitors. But the Vox logs later recovered from the ruined databanks spoke of a sudden breach from below, of heat signatures moving too fast to track, of inner catwalks sliced open, reactor regulators destroyed, a human form igniting the machine spirit's fail-safe sequence, with a coded phrase long forgotten, a phrase that only he could have known. The last entry was a scream, not of a man, but of a god machine, begging to die. And then it fell. The explosion tore a hole in the earth wide enough to swallow a fortress. Ash blanketed the air for kilometers. Traitor formations broke. Without the Titan, the line shattered. The Death Guard stalled. The Iron Warriors began fallback sequences. The word-bearers ran. And then the ash cleared. And there he was, Jaghatai Khan, armor cracked, blood pouring from rents in his side. His left gauntlet was missing. His sword glowed with a dim blue light, flickering with the final embers of whatever ancient power had allowed him to gut a god. But he stood, on the edge of the crater, like the eye of the storm. The white scars rallied. They poured from the east, screaming vengeance. Engines screamed as jet bikes dove into fleeing formations. The sons of the Khagan struck like thunder reinvigorated, and they saw him, and they followed. He did not speak. He did not wave. He only rode. through the shattered front, through the madness, through the dying breath of Terra's last night. By the time he returned to the White Tower, it was nearly morning. The ash in the air turned gold. He stepped from Skyspear with a limp. His blade was gone. His helmet hung from his side. His cloak was burned through in 3 places. Blood still dripped from the space between his ribs. Dorn awaited him. So did Malcador. Sanguinius arrived minutes later, face pale, armor cracked, wings soaked in ichor. The 3 stood in silence. Then the angel spoke. "You rode alone?" The Kagan nodded. "I rode because no one else could." "And now?" Dorn asked. "Now we wait." He turned to look at the rising sun through the haze of fire, and for a moment the wind blew again, carrying the sound of hooves across an ancient steppe. The storm had not ended. It had only slowed, because it was watching, waiting for the final charge. And when it came, Jaghatai Khan would be ready.